Okay, this is something which is the second section, Guns and Whores. Um, Makes the connection. What Kubrick does that's very good is he makes the connections which a number of theorists have made about the male body in wartime. Now we saw the same thing in in Top Gun, not so much in Platoon, but in Top Gun we saw it to some extent in Platoon, but much more in Top Gun. And here it is represented in the infantry as opposed to the Air Force or the Naval Air Force, which is what that was. And so here is the military's understanding, basically, of the male body in a very strange sort of way. So have a look at this again. This is a familiar scene now of Hartman with the troops in the barracks. Okay, have a look.
Where in the hell are you from anyway, Private?
Sir, Texas, sir!
Holy dog shit! Texas, only steers and queers come from Texas, Private Cowboy. And you don't much look like a steer to me, so that kind of narrows it down. Do you suck dicks?
Sir, no, sir!
Are you a Peter Puffer?
Sir, no, sir!
I'll bet you're the kind of guy that would fuck a person in the ass and not even have the goddamn common courtesy to give him a reach around. I'll be watching you. Did your parents have any children that lived?
Sir, yes, sir!
I bet they regret that. You're so ugly you could be a modern art masterpiece. What's your name, fat body?
Sir, Leonard Lawrence, sir!
Lawrence what, of Arabia?
Sir, no, sir!
That name sounds like royalty. Are you royalty?
Sir, no, sir!
Do you suck dicks?
Sir, no, sir!
Bullshit, I'll bet you could suck a golf ball through a garden hose.
Sir, no, sir!
I'm just adding a little bit here because I seem not to have talked about this. I'm not really sure why, but the reason I'm replaying this piece with Hartman and the two men is the relentless homophobia about it, of course. But what's interesting is that the Hartman seems to have a great deal of inside information about what queer sex looks like. And there is, even now, even with the integration of the military, of even of supposedly trans people, I mean, good luck. It's difficult enough, I think, being an outsider in this culture. But going into the military and then being an outsider there, you have to be a very tough, resilient individual indeed. It's terrifying. I can't imagine the courage it takes. I really can't, especially with people like Bo. Oh, for Christ's sakes, now I'm going to not remember their names. But anyway, the people who have transitioned while they're in the military. But the issue here with Hartman and the men is that essentially these are in some ways lustful exchanges, and so people are quick to say, "Oh, this is homosociality." It's like, yeah, but then all men together are homosocial beings. I mean, so like a football team is. I mean, people playing cards is, it's whatever. So I think there's something else going on here, and it's been explored at length. I mean, this is something which academics, people studying queer theory, have taken up the position of the sort of terror and also fascination with the queer male body inside the military, which is why, arguably, it took so long for queer people, but queer men, to be accepted in the military, because this is all tied up with the performance of masculinity. And the idea was that somehow a queer man couldn't perform masculinity at war. It's like, well, why not? What is exactly the problem there? This is why I've left it in.
This is my rifle, this is my gun. This is for fighting, this is for fun. This is my rifle, this is my gun. This is for fighting, this is for fun. This is my rifle, this is my gun. This is for fighting, this is for fun. This is my rifle, this is my gun. This is for fighting, this is for fun. This is my rifle, this is my gun. This is for fighting, this is for fun.
This separation, apparent separation of the penis from the gun, and as I talked about on I think on day one with Top Gun. The issue with the gun is that it can go on ejaculating and remain hard, which is why ultimately it's the better of the weapons. So sex is one of these strange things where it sort of it can become rape. It's an odd the male understanding of the male military understanding of the body, of both the male body and the female body, is that the female body becomes a target for rape primarily, and many things can be feminized. Civilians may say all be feminized according to the military's. So I want you to keep the first scene with the men marching and trying to separate, what's for fighting and what's for fun, with this next scene where these two get tangled up and it's impossible to extricate them. Okay, so have a look at this next scene where an ARVN soldier arrives and is a pimp with a prostitute on his bike or on his little scooter. Okay.
What you got there, Chief?
Do you want number one, Forky?
Oh, yeah. Hey, you boys want number one, Fucky?
I'm so horny I can't even get a piece of ham.
Me want sucky.
Sucky, Forky, smoke cigarette in a pushy. She give you everything you want. Long time.
Everything you want. Hey, how much there, Chief?
$15 each.
No.
Number 10. $15 buku money. $5 each.
Come on, she love you good. Boom, boom, long time. $10.
$5.
No, $10.
Be glad to trade you some ARVN rifles. And never been fired and only dropped one.
Okay, $5. You give me.
Okay. All right.
Let's get mounted.
Thằng chị biết ở đâu?
Sao không chịu?
Nó buồn quá.
Thôi chịu đã đi, có gì đâu à.
Dạ đi.
Something wrong there, Chief?
She say no boom boom with soul brother.
Hey, what the motherfucker?
She say soul brother, chupoku.
And what is this, man?
I think what he's trying to tell you is that you black boys pack too much meat.
Chupoku.
Oh, shit. This baby's hand look like she can suck the chrome off a trailer hitch.
She say chupoku.
Excuse me, ma'am. What we have here, little yellow sister, is a magnificent specimen of pure Alabama black snake. But ain't too goddamn buku.
Okay. MG.
Okay, MGU.
All right. This is my boogie.
Hey, we need a bat in order.
I'm going first. Now back off, white bread. Don't get between the dog and his meat.
All fucking niggers must fucking hang. Hey, I won't be long. I'll skip the foreplay.
All right, so what we have here is, and Kubrick is really good about this stuff, is there's a huge fight going on between the squad, specifically with Cowboy as the spokesperson, and the pimp, and to some extent the sister, because as one of the soldiers, as the black soldier says, little sister. And this sister here comes from the discussion, again, as always, about the fact that African Americans fighting in Vietnam are fighting two wars. They're fighting one with, depending on how close to the front they are, the closer they are to the front, the less they're fighting it. But behind the lines, essentially, the black soldiers are confronted by terrible white racism and white supremacy and Southern soldiers who, wave the Confederate flag and so on. And they actually run the Confederate flag up flagpoles, and there are fights about it and so on. So that's a major issue. And then the black soldiers fighting the Vietnamese. What we have then is, in this case, the black soldier who says to the prostitute, Listen, little sister, because the black soldier understands the Vietnamese as being another person of color. Doesn't mean he's not going to rape her or engage her services as a prostitute. It just means that he understands some kind of kinship with her. Okay. This is a complex scene. The main fight is between Cowboy. So here we've got the men who are fighting in Hue. And Hue is a city far, far to the north in South Vietnam. So, as you know, Vietnam is divided into two by the demilitarized zone. Hue is right near the demilitarized zone. It's just south, basically, of the DMZ. And north of it is North Vietnam. So the fighting in Hue was extremely intense because it's a strong point for the North Vietnamese. They're nearly at home. So here they are just south of the DMZ in Vietnam, in South Vietnam. So the Marines are fighting the North Vietnamese. Okay. And their allies are supposed to be the South Vietnamese, who are also fighting this war. But what we have is this guy who arrives on the battlefield in perfect, fully ironed, pressed, beautiful fatigues, which have never been in service. So clearly this guy is not fighting. He's not part of the military. I mean, he's military, but he's not engaged in fighting. He's a pimp. So the fight then is between essentially the people who are supposed to be American allies. I mean, the Americans are supposed to be allies of the South Vietnamese. This is supposed to be the South Vietnamese fight. They're supposed to be doing the fighting. And the Americans are angry. They're enraged. And you get this a little bit later on when Cowboy says, I'm not so hot on some of these guys we're fighting with. They're we meet them coming the other way, which means that the Americans are going towards the front to fight the North Vietnamese, and the South Vietnamese are deserting and leaving their allies, the Americans, on the front lines alone. Okay. So there's a fight over how much they're going to pay for everything they want. There's a fight for essentially the sexual body of Vietnam, which is embodied by this young woman, who is basically becomes a piece of meat between the two forces. And ultimately, the way that Cowboy gets what he wants and what the squad wants is by insulting the honor of the pimp who comes to sell the young woman. And the way he does this is he says, they're fighting about the amount, right? He says, $5. And he says, no, $10 you give me. And Cowboy says, too beaucoup, it's too much. And this is this pidgin French, because the French fought in Vietnam, French, English, Vietnamese, which all the men and women speak, basically, because this is how they get by in negotiations. So everybody has a little bit of everything, but nobody really knows anything much. Which is why they discuss in Vietnamese, the men talk in English, and then they barter in this pidgin. So Cowboy says, I'd be happy to trade you Arvin rifles, which have never been fired and only dropped once, which is one of the most insulting things you could possibly say. It's an amazing insult. It's beautifully given, and that's it. The South Vietnamese guy, the Arvin, the Army of the Republic of Vietnam soldier, loses his shit, and he says, "All right, you give me." It's like, you're going to give me the money. So he loses because he has lost face, because he knows that the Arvin are not going to stand and fight. They see this war and they're like, well, you go ahead and fight that war, America. But we, meanwhile, are here to do business. We're here to survive. So the South Vietnamese rarely were true believers by this point in the war. This is now 1968. It's the Tet Offensive. So it's February 1968. The South Vietnamese are just waiting. They're just hoping the Americans are going to win, basically. But they're not interested in getting killed for this fight. So that's one of the fights that's going on. Then there's this racial fight, which is also going on in the middle of it. And then there's the prostitute who says, no, I won't have sex with the black guy because his penis is too big. And this is one of these weird things. It's sort of a quintessential Kubrick moment where a soldier actually has to convince the prostitute that he doesn't have too big a penis. And it's a fascinating moment, where he's so desperate to get laid or to rape her that he is prepared to confess in front of all the other men that he doesn't have too big a penis. Like that's the issue. We then get the outer ring of the female body, which I'm trying to remember her name, Linda Williams, in her book Hardcore, will talk about the visual frenzy. And so the pimp says, he has this sort of little spiel, says this, smoke cigarette in the pussy, she give you everything you want. What is that? In Vietnam and in Thailand, as far as I know, and in Cambodia before the fall of Prince Sihanouk. I think that's right, yeah. And the rise of the Khmer Rouge, the communists, basically, in Cambodia, which then became Kampuchea briefly, and then became Cambodia again after the Khmer Rouge were knocked over, because this was a genocidal realm or genocidal regime. The women, Asian women in some of these countries, Vietnam, Cambodia to some extent, and Thailand, and it still goes on in Thailand as I understand it. There is an enormous amount of sex tourism that goes to Thailand. From America, from Canada, from Europe, people go to Thailand to buy sex / rape. I really don't know what to call it. Rape will do, I think, with children, with young women, with young boys, and so on. The young women who put on sex shows, now you can still see these, as I understand it, in Thailand, had learned at this point to do a number of things, tricks essentially with the vagina, including uncapping beer bottles, picking beer bottles up, so they'd be on the stage and there would be music playing, and they would lift up a beer bottle, squat down, basically pick up the beer bottle with a vagina, lift it up, uncap it, and so on, including smoking cigarettes, apparently, by tensing the vaginal muscles. Put a cigarette in a burning cigarette between the vaginal lips. So it would be long, and it's not a short. The idea is not to get burned, although I'm sure people got burned. Tense the muscles up and essentially inhale the smoke, and then remove the cigarette and exhale the smoke. The point about this, so like, what's that all about? It's about making the vagina visible. So there's a huge discussion here about the way that the male, soldier male, wants to see and exploit the female body and make it do things which it's like a 5-year-old boy is sort of playing with the body. But at the same time, it's also the body of the country. And this is what I want you to keep in your mind as you watch, as we saw that. Okay, so that's a lot, eh? There's a lot in this particular scene. So you might want to go back and have a look at it again, because there are these basically three, at least, different things. There's the struggle between the Americans and the South Vietnamese forces who are not fighting at the Arvin. There's the struggle between the African Americans and the white soldiers in the squad and the Vietnamese. And there's the struggle between the men and for the control of the woman's body, and the rendering visual that which is not seen. I mean, the point about the vagina is that it can't be seen effectively. The penis is outside, the vagina is inside. It's like, so how are you going to make it visible? Well, this way. And there are a number of other all of these sort of tricks that these bar girls had to learn if they were going to perform these shows are part of this, as I say, what Linda Williams would call the frenzy of the visible. It's a discussion of pornography and where pornography goes and so on. It's another whole massive thing. But this is why it's like, this is why I want you to stay focused on this. This is a lot. It's the same argument that we saw in Top Gun. It's the same relationship fundamentally between the two planes over each other and Kelly McGillis and Tom Cruise over her with his tongue. Same argument, but this is much more realistic and it's much grittier and it's much, much uglier. Same thing though, it's just one is prettier, quote unquote, than the other. Top Gun is in many ways much more dangerous than Full Metal Jacket. When you're looking at Full Metal Jacket, you cannot get away from this. It's an ugly, ugly scene. In Top Gun, you're like, oh, that's sweet. It's a romance. Like, okay, so it's a problem, right? Okay. Now have a look at this next scene, which is taken pretty much directly from Michael Hare's book Dispatches, where the men who are now looking at the next dead, there are 3 women basically in the film. The prostitute at the beginning, which we just saw with her high heels, the second prostitute who is argues for herself but is otherwise sort of like, okay, this is a job, and the sniper, and they get progressively younger and more powerful, arguably. But at the same time, the view of them from the American Marines' point of view is it doesn't change. They are sexual targets, as we see the THE Rock say. No more boom boom for that baby Sam. Okay, have a look.
No more boom boom for this baby son. There's nothing we can do for her. She's dead meat.
I'm coming to... Hold on a second. And before I move on to the next section, which is Vietnam the movie, in case you thought that things have improved a whole deal since we're now in the 21st century, and that was, after all, 50 years ago, or more than 50 years ago, we can say, oh, well, it's not 1968 anymore, thank God. We're so far ahead. It's like, maybe not. Have a look at a book by Carol Burke, which was published in 2004. And it's interesting that this book has not become a sort of staple in military circles. It has to some extent. It has and it hasn't. It's called Camp All-American, Hanoi Jane and the High and Tight. There's a reason for all this. And I'll put an image of it up here. Here's an image of it. This book is really smart. Burke went to the military colleges, the famous military colleges, the Virginia Military Institute, the VMI. It's just called the VMI, which is like West Point, basically, and West Point, and so on. And she observed, essentially as an anthropologist, how the men and women, because at this point the forces were beginning to integrate women into the ground troops for the first time, because the war, essentially the wars in Iraq and Afghanistan, but specifically in Iraq, because there was no front in the war, it meant that women wound up being in combat, whether they were designed to be, or they were intended to be in combat or not. So by the time we get to 2004, Congress has to agree that women already are in combat. And even if that's not legal, they have to accept it, because if they take the women out of combat, they'll lose too many forces. They just will lose too many people. They can't afford to lose that many people, especially by 2004. However, Burke goes and observes the men who are being trained to be officers, really. And she records, one of the things she records early in the book is in these big military colleges, and there's a huge industry of training boys to become to become professional soldiers, particularly in the South. It's a very long tradition. It goes back to the Civil War. and actually before that, where you could be trained to be a soldier, and you'd be a soldier your whole life. And if there was a war on, you went wherever there was service, or you were billeted in a barracks somewhere. And this has gone on in America. So there's always a sort of standing army that functions in these military schools. And when the Americans ran out of troops in the early part of the 21st century, in 2004, 2005, when things in Iraq heated up and got bad and people started being killed, if they couldn't draft people because the draft would not have flown, that would have been very bad news for the Bush White House. What they did was they would go down to the military colleges and pick up the most recent, the most interesting and best looking basically officers to be, commission them on the spot, second lieutenant, first lieutenant, put them in the field, and promote them right into the war, basically, because they were trained, is the argument. Okay, so Burke is at the VMI, and she is observing the men counting cadence. Now, you've seen this in, you've seen the cadence calling in Full Metal Jacket, which I will show you a little bit of later on. And so she notes a cadence which is called the S&M man. Now this is illegal, but they do it anyway. So when you're counting cadence, you're doing this half step part march. It's a quick march. So there's this. It's a jog basically, and it's deadly because you have to be in excellent shape for it, and you just go on doing it. You can go on. The troops are sort of they're in shape. They are trained to do this, so they can do it pretty much all day. So if they need to make 30 miles in the day, they can do it. That's the idea. With a full pack, right, a 50-pound pack. But this is called chopping. So if you see a group, a squad, doing cadence together, it's called chopping. So they're chopping across the quad. She's watching these men. And they're counting cadence, which means they're using these rhymes, which will keep you in line. They will keep the troop moving together. And it's sort of to the tune of the Candyman, which is the song that what's his name? Bloody hell! Sang in Charlie and the Chocolate Factory. Sammy Davis Jr. Who can take a chainsaw, and it goes like this. Who can take a chainsaw, cut the bitch in two, fuck the bottom half and give the upper half to you, the S&M man, right? So the sadism and sadomasochism, the sadism and masochism man, the S&M man. The S&M man, because he mixes it with love and makes the hurt feel good. Who can take a bicycle, then take off the seat, set his girlfriend on it, ride her down a bumpy street, etc. Who can take some jumper cables, clamp it to her tits, jumpstart your car and electrocute the bitch, the S&M man, etc. So that's from 2004. Now this stuff's supposed to be illegal. However, Burke, who had permission to go and do this work, had no problem A, seeing it, and B, getting a copy of it because it was given to her. It's like, yeah, they were proud. People are proud of this stuff. So this terrible misogyny, she says, one of her points is, the more I saw in her, the more I wondered how female students managed to adjust to such a culture. Well, good question. Okay, that's enough for this section.